Hello, and welcome to my first ever booktube. My name is Sadie, also known as the Yarnivore, and also known as Sadie Ruin on Twitter, Instagram, Goodreads, Library Thing, Litsy. Pretty much everywhere it's either Sadie Ruin or Blue Ruin, but Blue Ruin is taken 90% of the time. Now, I figured the best way to start a booktube or a booktube channel or a booktube playlist for my channel would be to introduce you to my top 10 of all time, because that really gives you a sense of my reading, what I like to read, how crazy I get, and basically whether or not we're going to have styles that match. I tend not to do a lot of YA. Sometimes I do, but not very often. And I tend to stick towards more regular fiction, more literary fiction. I don't do a whole bunch of sci-fi and fantasy. However, some of my favorite books are fantasy. So, without further ado, in no particular order, I have them written down in a book. I actually wrote a book. I didn't write a book. I wrote down in my book so I would know what I was talking about. Top 10 of all time so far. It could change throughout my lifetime, but so far these are the ones, in no particular order, that I adore. So, Franny and Zooey from J.D. Salinger. This is not The Catcher in the Rye, but this is a book about the one family that a lot of the stories are based off of. Franny, Zooey, and their brother, who is Seymour, which is Raise High the Roof Beams Carpenter, and Seymour in Introduction. J.D. Salinger has not written a lot of books, but this one is my bar none favorite. It's about a brother and a sister and their relationship, written in approximately the 60s, I want to say. Was it the 60s or was it the 50s? Oh, wrong. 55. Copyright 55 for the first, so not the same character sequence as Catcher in the Rye, but I found this one to be more powerful, maybe because I preferred the female character in here. Definitely anti-heroes. I just love Salinger's writing. It's so poignant. The second book that I would have to put on my top 10 list is by one of my favorite authors of all time, Jack Kerouac. Of course, this is On the Road. This is the third copy I've owned. I picked this one up at a library sale. I'm not sure if you could tell. I remember reading this for the first time when I was 19 and I was about to go on a trip with my friend. We were going from Canada, where I grew up, to Arizona to her family's timeshare condo, and it was probably the perfect time to be reading this book, which of course is about traveling in the 50s and this wayward life of Jack Kerouac and his friend Neil Cassidy, also called Dean in this book, Dean Moriarty. And the life of a vagabond and a beatnik and a street poet at the time. Very stream of consciousness. If you like stream of consciousness stuff, this will definitely be good for you. If you need structure, yeah, Bob, don't do it. If you like structure, then don't do this book, because it's very unstructured, it's very run-on. The narrative is continuous. If you know anything about the history of On the Road, it was originally written in one long bender on one scroll, and you can actually get the one scroll copy, which I may get at some point, just to see the difference, because it's the actual reprinting of the one scroll. Just a super great book that encapsulates the time and a certain sense of wanderlust. Jack Kerouac, of course, had a very hard time being a beatnik, and he didn't want to be one of the beat poets. He wanted to be a normal guy. He was obsessed with solitude and Buddhism, trying to figure himself out. He never really got that far. Up next, I struggled of which one of these to pick. I have many H.P. Lovecraft compilations. This particular one is Blood-Curdling Tales of Horror and the Macabre. It is a Del Rey edition. This one has the Call of Cthulhu, the Dunwich Horror, the Color of Space, and the Color Out of Space, and the Shadow over Innismouth. All of H.P. Lovecraft's work is amazing. It's so sad he did not get the recognition he deserved when he was actually alive. But I think a lot of people who enjoy horror genres, which I do, tend towards enjoying him just because he's one of the godfathers of a good suspenseful horror. And everybody knows who Cthulhu is. I really don't think I need to explain Cthulhu, the idea of the Necronomicon. These are all things that started with H.P. Lovecraft. Love him. Up next, I've taken this book. I took it in several English classes, and it still retains the joy for me, which is Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre. This is my original copy, which I got used. It's completely battered up. It's a Penguin, the black edition, which has all of the notes in the back. I'm a sucker for notes. If there's a book with notes, I'm going to want that over the book without notes, because I'm weird like that. But if you don't know the tale of Jane Eyre, the orphan who finds love, I am not a Jane Austen person. I have read almost everything by Jane Austen because of various classes I've taken, and I think there's one or two I haven't read. I don't like any of them. Pride and Prejudice is okay. I understand it. Occasionally I think it's better than okay, but for the most part I rank it as okay. I'm a Bronte girl, and Charlotte Bronte can do no wrong. Nor can her sisters. I have read Emily Bronte, which is Wuthering Heights, and Anne Bronte, which is Agnes Grey. I love them all way more than I will ever love Austen. However, Jane Eyre will always have my heart because I read it in my first year of university, and it spoke to me, and I love it. And the BBC adaptation, also really enjoyed that one. Now, some YA that's going to end up on my top 10 that's going to confuse people. S.E. Hinton's The Outsiders, and this book is so old that it's still got the inscription in it. My mom gave this to me on my 10th birthday. It was a request that I had. Most kids in my city in Canada, where I grew up in Regina, Saskatchewan, Canada, and I currently live in the United States. Right now I'm in Washington, the Washington state, not Washington, D.C. But where I grew up, everyone took this in like grade 8. Grade 8, everyone had to read The Outsiders, and I started reading it much more before grade 8, and subsequently completely fell in love with the characters. I had a cat growing up named Ponyboy. Like, I was addicted to this book. I can still tell you the first paragraph of this book verbatim without having to look. And if you haven't read it and you like YA, it's a great story about a tumultuous time in this one young man's life as a killing occurs and he has to decide what to do with himself. There's some subsequent heroism, the wrong side of the tracks, their parents have passed away, diamond in the rough. And the movie is fabulous. It has Emilio Estevez, C. Thomas Howell, stars as Ponyboy, there's Rob Lowe, Ralph Macchio. S.E. Hinton was a genius when I was a child. Like, this book spoke to me in a way none other could. And I find it interesting that a book that's written all about male characters is written by a woman. S.E. Hinton used her initials because she wanted to be taken seriously as writing from the male perspective. And she writes it very genuinely. So, if you haven't checked this out, it's not a big book. It's 156 pages. Seriously, read it in an afternoon. Totally worth the afternoon. Hi, Bob. Bebop is making an appearance. This is my dog, Bop. His BB-8 hoodie. Alright, so we have 5 more to go. What's up? Are you cold? Why don't you go get me a toy? Do you want to lay on the bed? Okay, come here. Chirp. Right, so up next is The Hunchback of Notre Dame by Victor Hugo. Boop. Disney did a movie about this. We won't talk about the Disney movie. What we will talk about is how Victor Hugo is an amazing writer. Even though this has been translated, does it say who it's been translated by? This is the unabridged one. All of his works were written in French originally. No, you're not going to tell me who translated it. Okay. It doesn't really matter what edition you have. The Hunchback of Notre Dame, of course, is the story of the hunchback, or deformed man Quasimodo, who is taken in by a cardinal, a bishop, a clergyman at Notre Dame, and he becomes the bell ringer, and subsequently he falls in love with Esmeralda when he sees her during the Feast of Fools. And as we get into the nitty-gritty of the life of Esmeralda, who is a street gypsy, which is kind of a derogatory term nowadays and really shouldn't be used, but back in the time, that was what they used, and basically how she managed to live her life in that time frame. It gives you a lot more background on her. It gives you a lot more background on Quasimodo and what his life was like being locked up in a bell tower by Frollo. And just so well written. It speaks so much of the time, and you can really get the feeling that you're in Paris, that you are standing there staring at Notre Dame. What? And it is just beautiful. Again, please do not take the Disney into account here, because the book is so amazing and touching, and if you don't cry at the end, you're a bigger person than I am. What's that? Go down, please. Thank you. Up next, we all know Margaret Atwood has to be on this, because not only am I Canadian, but I'm a Canadian feminist. And pretty much all, you'll be hard-pressed to find Canadians who don't like Margaret Atwood, or at least say they like Margaret Atwood because she is a national treasure. This is my favorite Margaret Atwood book. It was a toss-up between this and Alias Grace, which I also like, which is a historical fiction. This is a true fiction. The Robber Bride, play on the robber bridegroom, about a group of friends who is dealing with this one woman who comes into their lives at different times and completely wreaks havoc and destroys them, and what happens when she comes back. There isn't a book by Margaret Atwood that I don't love, but this one is especially poignant, and I think it was poignant because when I had read it, I enjoyed it, but then I reread it at a time where I was dealing with a very tumultuous friendship, and it really made me feel better about everything going on. I love the way she writes. I love the vividness of her words. You're just there, and you feel the characters, and you understand the characters, and they're so full of depth, and you want them to win. So The Robber Bride is definitely my favorite, as we follow, of course, the lives of these three women, and how they've changed, and how this one woman who came in and with this friendship and destroyed their lives individually, and then together, how they manage to rally together when she comes back. Up next, this is 8? Book 8? Book 8. We'll go with Book 8. Book 8 is The Waves by Virginia Woolf. This is, again, another really stream of consciousness-y book. So if you don't like stream of consciousness, if you need things to be very linear, if you have to have a plot that makes sense right from the start, this is not a book for you. But I love Virginia Woolf, and I love this book particularly. Now, it is a hard read, and it is one of the first ones I read. And it was a gift from a very good friend, and I think she was right to give it to me at the time she did. And it inspired me to go out and read more. But I think it also inspired me to understand that when I'm reading these stream of conscious books, I need to have big chunks of time. This is not a book you can sit down and read a page here and a page there. You have to devote time to this book because you need to read a chunk to follow the train of thought. And as it shifts from narrator to narrator, it's fine if you take a break there, but really you need to be with that narrator for that chunk to feel it. And we're following a group of friends, as it says on the back, tracing the life of a group of friends. The Waves follows their development from childhood to youth to middle age. So there isn't really a plot. If that's what you need, this is not a book for you. If you love characters and very character-driven things, that this is one you want to try out. I love all Virginia Woolf. The Waves is my personal favorite, and I don't know that I can say much about it, because that is the essence of The Waves. Number 9, I guess I was going from lightest to heaviest. Number 9 is The Mists of Avalon. It's a retelling by Marion Zimmer Bradley. It's a feminist retelling. Well, not a feminist, I guess a feminist. It is also now an epic miniseries from TNT, which I own on DVD. Actually wasn't a bad miniseries if you watch it all in one as a movie. This, of course, the retelling of King Arthur and King Arthur's court from female perspectives, Morgane Le Fay, etc., etc. I just loved this book. I loved how well it was written. I loved the idea that it was all about females and the female perspective during all of that. I am really into Arthurian legends. Of course, you've got Le Morte d'Arthur by Thomas Mallory. You've got The Once and Future King by E.B. White. I've read them all. This is my personal favorite, and probably because Vivienne, Morgane Le Fay, as I said, Tigraine, even Uther Pendragon seems better in this book than he usually does. If you like high fantasy, this is probably something for you. If you like feminist retellings or female retellings of stories, this is probably for you. If you like fairy tale retellings, it's also probably for you. I need to reread this sometime soon because I actually was discussing it with one of my friends, and she was asking me questions about it. It's been a good 10 years since I read it last, so I probably need to reread it. And the pièce de résistance in my life, this comes as no surprise to anyone, The Lord of the Rings. This is my giant edition. This is the 50th anniversary edition. Lord of the Rings, with the, of course, symbol in gold and J.R.R. Tolkien on the back. I love The Lord of the Rings. Do I really need to explain why I love The Lord of the Rings? I am one of those people. You're either a Lord of the Rings person or you're not, and my husband is not a Lord of the Rings person, although he is a sci-fi and fantasy geek. And I am a Lord of the Rings person, and I'm not into a lot of sci-fi fantasy. So there you have it. As we all know, The Lord of the Rings is the story of Frodo and his quest with the One Ring and how that all turns out. Now, when it's broken down into individual books, The Fellowship of the Ring, The Two Towers, and The Return of the King, I admit fully that the second book is basically a slog of we're running and we're walking and we're running and we're walking and we're running and we're walking, then we're riding and we're walking and we're running and we're fighting. That's basically the second book. I'm fine with that. I'm fine with admitting there is a lull there, but I feel that the entirety of the book, the scope and the majesty of all the land and all the different languages that go into it, it's just It's beautiful and it's magical. I, of course, was raised on it, so I don't think I had a choice. It has always been in my household. My brothers were reading it. My brothers are 10 and 7 years older than me, and they were reading it when I was very young, and it was always laying around, The Lord of the Rings. Not in this particular format. This is a gift for a book lover, is what this is. I don't know that I'd ever actually read this copy because it's really big and heavy. I also have it on Kindle, and I used to have the little books. I need to get a new set of little books just for individual reading's sake. But there was always like Lord of the Rings laying around. Of course, the original, badly animated with the backlit, those ones. We watched those quite often. The Hobbit, of course, also around the house a lot. So there really was no choice in whether or not I would become a fan of The Lord of the Rings. And it, of course, has taken its place at number, 10. It's number 10. It's not number 10 on my list. These are in no particular order. So this was basically an overview of my favorite books of all time thus far. Some may be kicked out, some may get changed. But these are the ones I would say define me as a reader and what I look for in books. So if these interest you, then I welcome you to stick along with my booktube and see what I'm reading. And I will be back at the end of the month with a total of what I've read.